Hello, and welcome to the Behavioral Health Matters podcast with Magellan Behavioral Health of Pennsylvania. This is the show that aims to promote positive mental health, increase our understanding of behavioral health topics and services, and reduce stigma. I'm your host, John Lees, and I'm the member and family advocate at Magellan of Pennsylvania here in the Lehigh Valley. On this episode, we will be discussing an important resource offered by the Suicide Prevention Task Force in Northampton County called the Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors, or the LOSS Team. These teams have been championed by politicians and other system stakeholders from this area to provide individuals who have lost someone to suicide with direct support and to let them know that resources exist to help them following a suicide. We will learn all about this extremely valuable service from our special guest, Chelsea Jones, Northampton County Director of Information Referral and Emergency Services. Also, be sure to stay tuned at the end of this episode to learn how you can provide us with your direct feedback about the podcast. And now, on to the show. This episode deals with the topic of suicide, which we know can be distressing. If you or someone you know are experiencing suicidal thoughts or a crisis, please reach out to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988, or for emergency situations, call 911. Our guest for this episode is Chelsea Jones. Chelsea is the Northampton County Director of Information Referral and Emergency Services. Chelsea has held several key positions at Northampton County and is here to share with us about her current role at the county, her involvement and history with the LOSS teams, and everything we need to know about this extraordinarily valuable service. And now, here's my conversation with Chelsea Jones. So welcome to the podcast, Chelsea.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me today.
You bet. And we're going to have a conversation about a pretty difficult subject. So I'm really glad that we have you on to help educate the listeners and help us to understand this subject a little bit more and what this resource has to offer.
I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about the LOSS team.
That's great. If you would, Chelsea, could you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners, a little bit about your background and your current role in Northampton County?
Sure. So I'm the Director of Information Referral and Emergency Services, which is just a very long title to say that I oversee two departments. The first is Information and Referral. That is kind of the hub of the county. So when people call in for information about what services might be available to them, or if they need to make a referral to a division within the Department of Human Services, you call into Information and Referral, and my team there can help you get connected. Emergency services is the other half of it, and that is what most people will know as crisis. So we are a 24/7 crisis service for Northampton County. So those are the two divisions that I currently oversee. I'm also obviously a member of Northampton County's LOSS team, and I am a certified QPR instructor. I'm trained in ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, CALM, which is counseling on access to lethal means. So I've really taken a specific interest in suicide prevention and postvention over the last few years. And fortunately, I've been able to kind of expand my role and go into projects that let me kind of work on it.
That's really great. If you could, would you share a little bit with our listeners about the history of the LOSS teams and also how you became involved with the LOSS teams here in Northampton County?
Sure. So LOSS stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors, and the model was originally developed by Dr. Frank Campbell out of Louisiana. Northampton County had the opportunity in 2021 to have Dr. Campbell come up and actually train us directly. So staff were offered the opportunity to come to the training, see if it's something you're interested in. And I went. I absolutely fell in love with the concept. I think it's kind of an untapped area where resource development would be really helpful. So we were trained in 2021 by Dr. Campbell and then received some additional training, which was ASSIST. And had the opportunity to kind of further develop those skills, and that is really where Northampton County's team began its development.
So this is great background. And now that we have that, let's shift gears a bit and learn more about the lost team specifically. Chelsea, can you define what a lost team looks like? Who is on the team exactly?
Teams are made up of lost survivors, which are people that have experienced or survived a suicide loss. And you'll hear throughout this podcast, I specifically say either death by suicide or a suicide death. We are really moving away from the term committed suicide. That is what most frequently you will hear people say, but in an effort to really reduce the stigma around suicide deaths, we've moved towards language that is death by suicide or suicide death. So you will hear me say that throughout it. So teams sometimes also have trained professionals, like mental health related professionals, but for the most part, teams are really driven by those suicide loss survivors. Both parties are trained, so it's not as though one party gets trained more than the other. So whether you would be a mental health related professional or whether you would be a loss survivor, you're still getting training. One of the things I will say is that we have really learned as our team got developed, every team does function a little bit differently.
Okay.
Different areas might have different access to resources. Not everyone may have the same exact types of training available. So what's most important is that every individual team looks at what are their resources, what are their options, and you do what fits best for you and what you have available to you.
That's great that it can be tailored to the specific area based on what's available and what the needs are. And so there's some kind of flexibility built in. And I'm sure that's appreciated by those who receive the services as well. So kind of shifting from that thought to getting more into the specifics of suicide. Are there any specific statistics that you can share with the listeners that may help to illustrate just how significant the issue of suicide is?
Absolutely. One important thing to note before I share them is that these statistics are derived from published finalized data in 2021, and it really is specific to the United States. So the first statistic I would share is that there was a death every 10.9 minutes in the United States, which means there is about 132 suicide deaths per day.
Wow, that's just eye-opening.
It's substantial. And a statistic that I think kind of piggybacks off that well is there is one suicide death for every 25 suicide attempts. So that means we know a lot of people are dying by suicide, but there's also a lot of people attempting suicide.
I mean, these numbers really quantify the significance of this issue and, why it's important to educate ourselves and, frankly, why it's important that we have conversations like the one we're having right now.
Absolutely. So this is a problem that we know even at an attempt level as well as a death level is really serious. And to kind of further highlight it, we know it's not specific to one age group. Suicide is the third leading cause of death. Again, this is referencing 2021 for people in the age group of 15 to 24.
So given the numbers you just shared with us, Chelsea, there's obviously a significant need. And I just think it's very fortunate that the lost teams exist, that you're able to provide the support to those who are most in need. And that we're able to do a small part here by highlighting the good work of the teams and the support that is possible.
Absolutely. We really hope that we are going to be able to continue to be that support and that non-judgmental resource for a family that may be experiencing a suicide loss, especially because we know suicide deaths are occurring at a really alarming rate.
And now, a brief message from Magellan. If you or a loved one are a Magellan of Pennsylvania member and have questions about services, please visit www.magellanofpa.com for more information. And now, back to the show. How do the lost teams get involved with someone who has experienced the death of a loved one by suicide? How is that connection made?
So in Northampton County, our referrals come directly from the coroner and his office.
Okay.
We want to make sure that we are only responding to referrals that are appropriate. Sometimes what can happen is a community member will hear about a death and they might believe it's a suicide. If they call into our office, wanting help from the resource for the family, but it turns out the death is actually not by a suicide, that would obviously be a really inappropriate referral and a really inappropriate contact to the family.
Sure.
So we make sure all of our referrals come directly through the coroner's office so that we make sure we are only contacting families that are appropriate for the service.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Important to know. Can you back up? Well, let's back up a little bit. Talk a bit about the funding. So is there a cost for anyone who would receive these services, or is there other funding that helps to support these teams and the work they do?
So for Northampton County, there is absolutely no cost to the family to receive support from the loss team. Northampton County's funding does come through the mental health budget, but we have talked about finding other ways to kind of raise funds to assist families. There are teams that do fundraisers, and I think that's a great way to also bring community awareness to the team. As the community supports the fundraiser, they learn what a loss team is, they learn what it does. It could be for them, it could be for a neighbor. So I think fundraising could also be a really great way to raise some additional funds to support families and raise awareness about what we do.
Yeah, as you were saying that, that's what I'm thinking is to really promote more about the programs and the support and its availability, but also to reduce that stigma, which you had mentioned. And of course, that's one of the missions of this podcast is to educate, to make folks aware about the services and supports that exist, but also to reduce stigma. And it's important that these conversations happen. And so the more I think that can happen in the community, folks can kind of hopefully increase their own understanding and get involved and again, help to kind of reduce some of that stigma associated with suicide.
Absolutely. This really should be a community member based program, and the purpose is to help fellow community members.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. So what specific support or services would be provided to either individuals or families by the teams?
So our team, when we go out, we actually put together a folder, and that folder has in there a booklet that talks about what happens following a suicide death. It talks about being a suicide loss survivor. There are a lot of resources out there for bereavement and grief, but not all of them are tailored specifically following a suicide death.
Sure.
So we wanted to make sure our materials in there were really catered to suicide deaths specifically. We also include in there local support groups that are specific to suicide. We also have contact numbers for kind of the local people that a family might need. The coroner's office's information is in there. Northampton County Department of Human Services information is in there. In my department within crisis, that phone number is also in there as well. So that is kind of the packet we take out to families. But truly, I would say one of the greatest resources that we provide is a listening ear. These are people who are going out to homes where there might be that shared experience of a suicide loss. And since it's such a specific type of loss, having someone who maybe not understands your exact experience, because every family is so different, but knows the pain and knows what it's like to lose someone by suicide. There are a lot of feelings that a family can go through after a suicide death, and some of them are really hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Sure, there could be anger, blame, guilt. Those are really challenging feelings, and sometimes families or friends don't feel super comfortable sharing those feelings with each other right after a death. We try to be that non-judgmental ear where they can truly share the things that they're feeling without the fear of being judged, without the fear of that stigma. So I would say that is one of the greatest supports, is that non-judgmental person that you can share your feelings with.
Yeah, and someone who's experienced that themselves and can kind of like you said, maybe not necessarily have gone through the exact situation, but something very similar, and understand the challenge of what do I do next? Where do I turn? Kind of wrestling with a lot of that or those feelings.
Absolutely. And ultimately, how involved the family wants us to be is completely up to them. We ultimately do want to respect a family's boundaries or their privacy. So, whatever amount of support they would like to have from us, we give. And if a family does not wish to have that support or would like privacy at that time, we, of course, respect that boundary.
Oh, that's great. So it really depends on the situation then, and you kind of let the family lead.
Absolutely. Every family can be so different. Every family dynamic can be so different. And we just want to make sure that we're being a support and not a burden. And so we always make sure to really respect what the family wants.
So, Chelsea, are there any specific challenges that the teams face?
Absolutely. The two that really come first to my mind are one, getting new team members onboarded has been challenging. We have had, information sessions. We're available to answer questions for anyone who might want more information to see if they want to join. And what seems to mostly happen is that people kind of walk away from it and say, we love what you're doing. We think this is really amazing, but ultimately, I'm probably not a good fit for the team.
Right.
And that's completely okay. We never want someone to be on the team that doesn't feel kind of fully confident that they should be on the team. And what's more important about that is because it's made up of lost survivors, we need to make sure that the person has had enough time to really go through their own journey of grief and make sure that they are kind of emotionally ready to be on a team like this. Because at the end of the day, it can be really tough to go into someone's home who just experienced such a terrible tragedy that no one should have to, and sit in their living room and talk to them about this and be a support. So it's important that the mental health of the team members are taken into account, as well as the mental health of the family who went through the loss.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely makes sense. It's I imagine a big emotional investment to be able to provide this resource and support, and as much support is being provided to those families, I'm sure that it really can be a real challenge for those providing it.
It can be, absolutely. So we need to do everything that we can to make sure that team members are also being taken care of, as well as the families.
That's great. It's good that there's that kind of monitoring and support within the team, and I'm sure that's appreciated as folks are providing the service. Outside of the teams, are there others, like providers or other supports or resources in our area or the community who get involved with the teams?
So we are looking at developing almost like a community support bank.
Oh, nice.
Obviously, outside of therapy and getting connected to someone that way, we've noticed all of these little needs, and I shouldn't say little needs, they're significant needs, but they're needs that maybe you don't traditionally think of. So, for example, maybe a local restaurant is willing to donate a cooked meal to a family. Shortly after a suicide death, a family probably does not feel up to cooking. So having that restaurant who's willing to say, hey, look, if a family's going through this, we'll be happy to donate a meal to them or maybe a few meals to them. We've also noticed, I can give you an example. I responded to a home where a woman lost her husband to suicide. He was the one who really took care of their yard work and their, the shoveling the snow in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of expressed, what am I going to do? I can't physically do those things. So we were thinking maybe we can get connected to maybe a local Boy Scout group or some other type of local group that would be willing to kind of go over there, maybe help her with her lawn or shovel her snow in the winter. That's just one of those resources that maybe you don't immediately think of,
Right.
but for a family that's experiencing that loss, that might be something that weighs on their mind very heavily. So our intent is to develop kind of this supportive group of resources that can fill in those needs and really help a family when they're going through this loss.
That's great. So it's not just the team itself. You're looking at making those other connections, making sure that all of those areas are being addressed and that support being provided, which is fantastic. And it's great that others in the community are willing to step up and provide that help in a time of need for people.
It is. And ultimately, again, we do want to reduce that stigma. We want the community to understand suicide deaths occur, and we need to be there for each other when these things happen to support families and help them get through.
And now, an important message. On this episode, we are discussing suicide, and we know that this can be distressing for some people. If you or someone you know are having suicidal thoughts or experiencing a crisis, you can call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988, or for emergencies, dial 911. And now, back to the show. So, Chelsea, if you could, this has all been very informative and really impactful for me. Just hearing about this issue and the support that the lost teams provide. But I wonder, from your perspective, if you could talk a little bit about the impact you'd hope to see from the support that the suicide lost teams provide.
Sure. So I think more than anything, just having open discussion about the fact that suicide deaths really do occur, and they're occurring more frequently than anyone would want. So I think having that open discussion and letting families know that they don't have to suffer with those really hard feelings alone. There is someone here, there's a team here that can come over and be that non-judgmental support where you can really say the things that you're truly feeling and know that someone's here to listen and be that support and not judge you for it, because those feelings are really, really hard. And not just on the postvention side of things, but the more that we talk about suicide, I really hope that we can also work towards preventing suicide deaths. We have to have these open, honest conversations where people understand that it is okay to tell someone else, I'm really not feeling well, I'm thinking about suicide, and I need help, because it is here. You know, there are resources that you can contact 24/7. So if you're in that place where you think you need some help, or you're feeling suicidal, they're available and you can contact them. So I think overall, I just want to be able to help people, help prevent suicide, help families and loved ones after suicide deaths occur, and just let the community know that this is something that's very real and it's happening, and we've got to come together to really support each other through it.
And that's such a great message. I think, as I think about the work that you're doing and what the teams are doing, it's so critical to be able to support people through very difficult times, and certainly that is happening, it sounds like. And so that impact has to be very gratifying. But I also think too, just opening up a dialogue, as you mentioned, about this subject and about suicide. And that's part of what our podcast really is designed to do. Our mission is to help have these conversations, even the difficult ones, to make sure people know that it's okay to have these conversations, that there is help out there and available, and really to help reduce that stigma associated with suicide and with mental health overall. From my vantage point, I think that programs like the Suicide Loss Teams are an integral part of the fabric of our system of care that exists, both formal and informal. And I can tell, just talking with you about the work that you're doing, that this has a very human feel to it as well. And I would say thank you for the work that's being done, and for certainly helping our audience to kind of connect with it, understand, get some education, but hopefully too, move forward and be more comfortable having these conversations, moving forward.
No, I really appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to kind of share what we do and, even the challenges that can be associated with it. But ultimately, I really do hope the community hearing this resource, they get a better understanding of it, maybe have a better understanding of suicide, and ultimately I hope we can make a really positive impact.
For me, just, where we started and where I am now, just having this conversation, it's certainly helped me to understand better what these teams do, some of the challenges you face, but also just the bigger issue of suicide and that topic. Again, from our mission to help start to have these conversations, help people to be more comfortable having these conversations because people need help and it is available. And so let's help folks understand how they can get connected, the available resources that exist, and that it's okay to talk about these things and important to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you again for being our guest. We really do appreciate it, and we appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Stick around. We'll be right back to wrap things up, talk about what we learned on this episode, and give out some important information. So what did we learn on this episode of the podcast? Well, we learned that unfortunately suicide deaths are occurring at an alarming rate. However, we also learned that we're very fortunate in this area to have the suicide loss teams to support the survivors of suicide. These teams provide the survivors of suicide with direct support and also let them know that there are resources that exist. The teams hope to be a non-judgmental resource for a family that may be experiencing a suicide loss. If you want more information about the loss teams, visit www.losscs.org. We'd like to thank our guest today, Chelsea Jones, for joining us for this episode and for helping us to get the word out about this incredibly important resource. We'd also like to thank all of you for listening to this episode. We know the content that was discussed is difficult, but hopefully by talking about suicide and learning more about the loss teams, we can both raise awareness and help to reduce the stigma. Before we go, we want to take a minute to make sure we tell you that you can share your thoughts and ideas with us about the podcast. Email me directly at jglees@magellanhealth.com to let us know what you think. We'd appreciate the feedback. Well, that's it for this episode. I'm your host, John Lee, saying goodbye for now, and please remember, behavioral health matters.